The Seattle skyline glowed amber through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sterling Tower as Cameron stood motionless, watching the sun sink behind Mount Rainier. 6 years had passed since he last felt anything resembling peace. The penthouse. Apartments sprawled around him like a museum of memories he refused to touch. Each piece of furniture, every painting on the wall, remained exactly where Grace had placed them. Moving anything felt like erasing her existence. His phone buzzed with another message from Victor about the upcoming board meeting. Cameron ignored it. Numbers and projections no longer excited him the way they once did. Success felt hollow when there was nobody to share it with. He poured himself a scotch and returned to the window, his reflection staring back at him like a stranger. The intercom crackled to life. Mrs. Patterson's voice filtered through, apologetic and hesitant. A young woman had arrived for the live-in position, despite the late hour. Cameron frowned. He had forgotten about the interview entirely. Part of him wanted to send her away, but something made him pause. Perhaps it was the exhaustion in Mrs. Patterson's tone, or maybe the curiosity about someone desperate enough to show up at 9 in the evening. When Olivia entered the living room, she looked nothing like what Cameron expected. Her clothes were simple but clean, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. What struck him most were her eyes, warm brown and steady, holding neither judgment nor pity. She carried a worn portfolio under one arm and stood with quiet dignity despite being soaked from the rain. Cameron gestured toward the leather couch. She sat carefully, as if afraid to disturb the pristine cushions. He noticed the slight tremble in her hands, the way she gripped her portfolio a little too tightly. She was nervous, but trying hard not to show it. The interview began with standard questions. Her resume showed teaching experience at an elementary school, volunteer work at a hospital, and a gap of 8 months. When he asked about the gap, her expression shifted slightly. She explained that her brother had been diagnosed with a rare, autoimmune condition. The medical bills had consumed their savings. She needed stable employment with housing included so she could afford his treatments while staying close enough to visit him regularly. Cameron found himself listening more intently than he had listened to anyone in years. There was no self-pity in her voice, no dramatic plea for sympathy. She simply stated facts with the quiet strength of someone who had learned to carry heavy burdens without complaint. It reminded him of Grace, who had faced her own struggles, with the same graceful resilience. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the storm intensified. Rain began hammering against the windows with increasing violence. Cameron stood to close the balcony door he had left ajar earlier. As he turned back, the lights flickered once, then died completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in pale blue shadows. Olivia remained calm, waiting patiently as Cameron located his phone for additional light. He called building security, learning that a transformer had blown. Power would not be restored until morning. The elevator was down. She would need to wait out the storm here. They sat in the dimness, the city below glittering through the rain-streaked glass. Conversation flowed more naturally in the darkness, as if the lack of harsh light made honesty easier. Olivia asked about the painting above the fireplace, a landscape of the San Juan Islands. Cameron found himself talking about Grace, how they had sailed there on their honeymoon, how she had insisted on painting every sunset despite her terrible seasickness. For the first time in 6 years, speaking about Grace did not feel like reopening a wound. Olivia listened without interrupting, without offering meaningless platitudes. When he finished, she shared her own story of loss. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19, leaving her to raise Thomas alone. She had given up her dreams of becoming a professional artist to provide stability for her brother. The storm raged on. Cameron retrieved blankets and pillows, setting up the guest room for Olivia. As he handed her fresh towels, their fingers brushed briefly. The contact was fleeting but sent an unexpected jolt through him. He stepped back quickly, unsettled by his own reaction. Later, unable to sleep, Cameron wandered back to the living room. He found Olivia standing at the window, silhouetted against the storm. She had not heard him approach. In the dim light, he watched her trace patterns on the glass with one finger, lost in thought. There was something achingly beautiful about the moment, something that made his chest tighten with an emotion he could not name. She turned, sensing his presence. Their eyes met across the darkened room. Neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Two wounded souls recognizing the scars each other carried. Cameron cleared his throat softly. The position was hers, if she wanted it. Olivia's face transformed with relief and gratitude. She thanked him quietly, her voice thick with emotion. He nodded once and retreated to his bedroom, his heart beating faster than it had in years. As he lay in bed listening to the storm, Cameron realized something had shifted. For 6 years, he had existed in a state of suspended animation, neither fully alive nor completely dead. But tonight, for the first time since losing Grace, he had felt something stir in the frozen wasteland of his heart. Morning arrived with pale sunlight breaking through dissipating clouds. Cameron woke to the smell of fresh coffee. He found Olivia, in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the quiet efficiency of someone comfortable in domestic spaces. She smiled as he entered, a small, genuine expression that lit her entire face. Over coffee, they discussed practical arrangements. Olivia would have her own suite, reasonable hours, weekends off to visit Thomas. Cameron found himself being more generous with terms than necessary, wanting to ease the worry he saw lingering in her eyes. As she left to collect her belongings, Cameron stood at the window once more. The city sparkled clean and new after the storm. Something about the fresh-washed world felt symbolic, as if the universe was offering him permission to begin again. He did not know what the future held, but for the first time in 6 years, he was curious enough to find out. 3 weeks passed like pages turning in a book Cameron had forgotten how to read. The penthouse, once a mausoleum of memories, began to feel different. Small changes appeared that he noticed only in retrospect. Fresh flowers on the dining table. Curtains opened to let morning light flood the rooms, the faint scent of lavender from the cleaning supplies Olivia preferred. Nothing dramatic, yet everything felt transformed. Cameron found himself adjusting his schedule in subtle ways. He left for the office later, returned home earlier. He told himself it was about managing stress, about finding better work-life balance. But the truth whispered louder each day. He wanted to be there when Olivia hummed while arranging books, when she paused to admire the sunset, when she laughed at something on her phone. One evening, he arrived home to find her standing before Grace's portrait in the hallway. She did not notice him at first. Her expression held such tender sadness that Cameron felt his throat constrict. When she finally sensed his presence, she turned with a start. She had been crying, not dramatically, but the evidence lingered in her reddened eyes and the tissue clutched in her hand. Cameron moved closer, concern overriding his usual reserve. Olivia apologized quickly, embarrassed at being caught in such a vulnerable moment. He asked what was wrong. She hesitated before explaining that today marked the anniversary of her parents' death. 9 years had passed, yet the grief still ambushed her unexpectedly. Looking at Grace's portrait had reminded her of her own mother, who had possessed that same gentle smile. Cameron did something he had not done in years. He sat down on the hallway bench and invited Olivia to join him. They talked for hours, sharing memories of the people they had lost. He described Grace's infectious laugh, her terrible cooking, the way she collected stray cats despite being allergic. Olivia painted pictures of her parents with words, bringing them to life through stories of family dinners and road trips and ordinary moments made precious by love. As darkness fell around them, neither moved to turn on lights. The shadows felt safer somehow, like a confessional where truth could be spoken without fear of judgment. Cameron found himself revealing things he had never told anyone. The guilt that haunted him because he had been traveling for business when Grace's cancer was diagnosed. The anger he still carried toward a universe that took good people too soon. The fear that he had forgotten how to feel anything beyond grief and regret. Olivia listened with her whole being, her presence a balm to wounds that had festered for too long. When he finally fell silent, she reached out and took his hand. The gesture was simple, almost innocent, yet it shattered something inside him. He looked down at their joined hands, hers small and warm against his, and felt tears burn his eyes for the first time since Grace's funeral. He pulled away abruptly, standing and muttering something about work he needed to finish. Olivia did not follow or call after him. She understood the retreat for what it was, not rejection, but self-preservation. Cameron locked himself in his study, heart pounding, hands shaking. The walls he had built so carefully were crumbling, and the terror of that vulnerability overwhelmed him. The next morning arrived tense with unspoken words. Cameron buried himself in emails and conference calls, avoiding the common areas where he might encounter Olivia. But by midday, guilt gnawed at him. She had offered only kindness, and he had fled like a frightened child. He found her in the library, dusting the upper shelves with focused concentration. He apologized awkwardly, standing in the doorway like a stranger in his own home. Olivia climbed down from the step stool and faced him with that steady gaze that seemed to see through every defense. She told him there was nothing to apologize for. Healing was messy and non-linear. Sometimes people needed to retreat before they could move forward. Her understanding disarmed him completely. Cameron found himself asking if she would like to join him for dinner that evening, not as employer and employee, but simply as two people who enjoyed each other's company. Olivia accepted with a smile that made his pulse quicken. They ate takeout on the terrace as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. Conversation flowed easily, touching on books and music and childhood dreams. Olivia spoke about her love of painting, how she had given it up to focus on teaching and then caregiving. Cameron asked if she still painted. She admitted she had not picked up a brush in over a year. On impulse, Cameron suggested she use the spare room as a studio. The space sat empty, filled with nothing but dust and missed opportunities. Olivia protested that it was too generous, that she could not possibly accept. But Cameron insisted, surprising himself with his vehemence. The room should be used for creation, not left to gather cobwebs and regret. Days later, Olivia began transforming the space. Cameron found excuses to walk past the open door, catching glimpses of her at work. She painted with absolute absorption, her entire being focused on the canvas before her. Watching her create filled him with a strange mixture of peace and longing. She looked so alive, so present, everything he had forgotten how to be. One Saturday, she invited him to see her first completed piece. Cameron entered the makeshift studio to find a large canvas depicting the Seattle skyline during a storm. But this was no ordinary cityscape. She had captured something essential about the interplay of light and darkness, the way beauty and danger danced together in moments of chaos. The painting reminded him of the night they met, and he suspected that was intentional. He stood before the canvas, genuinely moved. Olivia watched him nervously, waiting for his reaction. When he finally spoke, his voice came out rough with emotion. The painting was extraordinary. She had real talent, the kind that could not be taught or faked. She should pursue this seriously, not hide it away. Olivia flushed with pleasure at his praise. She admitted she had dreamed of opening a small gallery someday, a space where emerging artists could display their work. But dreams required money and time, luxuries she could not afford while caring for Thomas. Cameron made a decision in that moment, one that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. He would help her make that dream real. He had resources sitting unused, connections in the art world through Grace's old friends. Olivia tried to refuse, insisting it was too much, that she could not accept such generosity. But Cameron was insistent. He needed to do this, not just for her, but for himself. He needed to believe that beauty and hope could still exist in a world that had taken so much. Their eyes met across the paint-splattered room. Something electric passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither was ready to name. Olivia looked away first, her cheeks colored with more than just artistic excitement. Cameron felt his heart hammer against his ribs, aware that he was standing on the edge of something that would change everything. Victor noticed the change during their weekly lunch meeting. He commented that Cameron seemed different, lighter, somehow. Cameron deflected the observation with talk of new meditation practices and better sleep habits, but Victor was too perceptive to be fooled. He asked directly if Cameron had met someone. The question hung in the air like smoke. Cameron wanted to deny it, to laugh it off as ridiculous speculation, but the words would not come. Instead, he found himself describing Olivia, trying to capture what made her special. Victor listened with growing understanding, then offered gentle advice. Grace would not want Cameron to stop living. She had loved him too much to wish him frozen in perpetual mourning. The words hit Cameron like a physical blow. Deep down, he knew Victor was right. Grace had possessed a generous spirit, one that would celebrate any happiness Cameron found, but knowing that intellectually did not ease the guilt that gnawed at him, allowing himself to feel something for. Olivia felt like betrayal, like choosing to forget the woman who had been his entire world. That night, Cameron stood before Grace's portrait as he had done countless times. But instead of the familiar ache of loss, he felt something new. Gratitude for the years they had shared, sorrow that they had not gotten more time, and underneath it all a tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, his heart had room for more than grief. He whispered to the painted image, words he had never dared speak aloud. He would always love Grace. She would always hold a sacred place in his soul. But he was tired of being half alive, tired of hiding from the possibility of joy. If she could hear him somehow, he hoped she would understand. The painted smile seemed to soften in the dim light, as if offering benediction. Cameron touched the frame gently, then turned away. Olivia stood in the hallway, clearly on her way to her room. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Cameron knew they had crossed a threshold, from which there was no return. The gallery space sat empty on a quiet street in Pioneer Square, its windows dusty but full of potential. Olivia pressed her hands against the glass, peering inside with barely contained excitement. Cameron stood beside her, watching her face, transform with hope and possibility. He had found the space through a real estate contact, knowing immediately that it was perfect for her vision. The rent was reasonable, the location ideal for foot traffic from the art walk that happened monthly. Cameron had already spoken with the landlord about lease terms. All Olivia needed to do was say yes. She turned to him, eyes shining with unshed tears. This was too much, too generous, more than she could ever repay. But Cameron shook his head firmly. This was not about repayment. This was about believing in talent and supporting dreams that deserved to flourish. They spent the afternoon walking through the empty space, Olivia describing her vision with animated gestures. She would feature emerging artists, people like herself who had talent but lacked connections or resources. The walls would rotate displays monthly. She would host opening receptions where artists could meet collectors in relaxed settings. Her enthusiasm was infectious, drawing Cameron into a world he had ignored for too long. As she spoke, Cameron found himself standing closer than necessary, drawn by the energy radiating from her. She gestured widely while describing a sculpture installation, her hand brushing his chest accidentally. Both froze. The touch lasted only a heartbeat, yet it sent electricity coursing through Cameron's entire body. Olivia stepped back quickly, cheeks flushing pink, apology tumbling from her lips. Cameron caught her hand before she could retreat further. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if they had held hands 1,000 times before. Neither spoke. The empty gallery around them faded away until only this moment existed, suspended in amber light filtering through dirty windows. Cameron lifted his free hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he cupped her cheek gently, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. Olivia's breath caught audibly. Her eyes searched his face, looking for certainty or doubt, finding only tender longing that matched her own. Cameron leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to stop this. But she rose on her toes to meet him halfway, and when their lips finally touched, the world rearranged itself around them. The kiss was soft at first, tentative and sweet, two people learning each other carefully. Then something shifted. Cameron pulled her closer, one hand sliding into her hair while the other pressed against the small of her back. Olivia melted against him, her arms winding around his neck. The kiss deepened, becoming urgent and desperate, expressing everything words had failed to capture. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Cameron rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, heart pounding so loudly he was certain she could hear it. Olivia's fingers traced patterns on the back of his neck, sending shivers down his spine. They stood like that for long moments, neither wanting to break the spell. Reality crashed back slowly. Cameron stepped away, running a hand through his hair, suddenly uncertain. He had crossed a line he swore he would never cross. Olivia worked for him. The power dynamic made everything complicated, potentially problematic. He started to apologize, but Olivia pressed her fingers against his lips, silencing him. She told him she wanted this, wanted him, had wanted it for weeks, but had not dared hope he felt the same. The job mattered to her, yes, but not as much as the connection they shared. She was willing to find other employment if it meant they could explore what was growing between them. Her honesty and courage shamed Cameron's hesitation. She was offering everything while he remained paralyzed by fear. They left the gallery hand in hand, neither speaking but both understanding that something fundamental had changed. The drive back to the penthouse felt charged with anticipation and nervousness. Cameron kept stealing glances at Olivia, still hardly believing this was real. She caught him looking and smiled, squeezing his hand reassuringly. That evening, they sat together on the terrace as twilight painted the sky purple and gold. Cameron finally voiced the fear that had haunted him since Grace's death. He was terrified of loving someone and losing them again. The pain of Grace's loss had nearly destroyed him. He did not know if he was strong enough to survive that kind of devastation twice. Olivia listened quietly, then shared her own fears. She worried that Cameron would always see her as inferior because of their different backgrounds. She feared being a placeholder, someone to ease his loneliness until someone more suitable came along. Most of all, she was scared that she was not enough, that she could never measure up to the memory of Grace. Cameron turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. He told her that Grace would always hold a piece of his heart, but that did not mean there was no room for Olivia. The heart was not a finite resource that got used up. Love expanded it, made it capable of holding more than seemed possible. Olivia was not competing with a ghost. She was her own person, bringing her own light into his darkness. He described what drew him to her. The quiet strength she showed in facing impossible situations. The kindness she extended even when the world had been unkind to her. The way she found beauty in ordinary moments and created art that touched something deep in the soul. She made him want to be better, to feel more, to risk opening himself to joy again despite the possibility of pain. Tears slipped down Olivia's cheeks as she listened. She confessed that Cameron had given her something precious too. He saw her as more than just a caregiver or employee. He believed in her dreams when she had almost stopped believing in them herself. He made her feel valued and worthy, not for what she could do for others, but simply for who she was. They kissed again, slower this time, savoring rather than rushing. When they finally pulled apart, Cameron suggested they take things slowly. Give themselves time to navigate this new territory carefully. Olivia agreed, though the way she looked at him suggested that slow might prove challenging for both of them. The following weeks unfolded like a dream Cameron was afraid to wake from. They established new routines that honored both the relationship and appropriate boundaries. Olivia moved into the second guest suite, giving them separate spaces while still living under the same roof. They shared meals and conversations, went to galleries and concerts, discovered shared passions for hiking and old movies. Cameron met Thomas at the hospital where he received treatment. The young man was thin and pale, but possessed the same warm spirit as his sister. He clearly adored Olivia, teasing her gently about finally finding someone who appreciated her properly. Cameron liked him immediately, touched by the obvious love between the siblings. Victor invited them both to dinner at his home, wanting to meet the woman who had accomplished what he thought impossible. His wife welcomed Olivia warmly, and by the end of the evening, the two women were exchanging phone numbers and making plans for lunch. Victor pulled Cameron aside before they left, telling him quietly that Grace would have approved. The words settled something in Cameron's chest that had remained unsettled for too long. But happiness, Cameron had learned, never came without complications. The trouble arrived in the form of Miranda Sterling, Grace's sister. She appeared at the penthouse unannounced one Saturday morning, her expression tight with disapproval. She had heard rumors about Cameron's new relationship and wanted to see for herself if they were true. Cameron invited her in reluctantly, aware that this confrontation had been inevitable. Miranda wasted no time with pleasantries. She accused him of disrespecting Grace's memory by replacing her so quickly with household staff. Her words were sharp and deliberate, designed to wound. How could he betray Grace like this when she had not even been gone a decade? Olivia, who had been in the kitchen, heard the raised voices and appeared in the doorway. Miranda turned her venom toward the younger woman, making cutting remarks about social climbers and gold diggers who preyed on vulnerable widowers. Cameron's temper, usually carefully controlled, flared hot and bright. He told Miranda that she had no right to judge his choices or insult Olivia. Grace had been gone for 6 years. He had mourned her deeply and would always cherish her memory. But he was still alive, and he deserved to find happiness again. Olivia was not some opportunist. She was a remarkable woman who had shown him that his heart still worked, that he could feel something beyond grief. Miranda's face hardened with fury. She declared that she would contest Grace's will, claim that Cameron was not in his right mind. She would make sure everyone knew what kind of man he really was, moving on so easily from his dead wife. Then she stormed out, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the windows. Silence filled the penthouse after her departure. Olivia stood frozen, her face pale with shock. Cameron moved to her immediately, pulling her into his arms. She trembled against him, whispering that maybe Miranda was right. Maybe they were moving too fast, disrespecting Grace's memory. Maybe this was all a mistake. Cameron tilted her face up to meet his eyes. He told her firmly that Miranda was wrong, that grief and bitterness had twisted her perspective. Grace had loved life and laughter and joy. She would never want him trapped in perpetual mourning. Choosing to love again was not betrayal. It was honoring the lesson Grace had taught him, that love was worth the risk of loss. He asked Olivia if she wanted to walk away, if Miranda's words had changed how she felt. Olivia shook her head vehemently. She was scared and uncertain, but she did not want to lose what they had found together. Cameron kissed her forehead tenderly, promising that they would face whatever came together. That night, Cameron stood before Grace's portrait one final time. He spoke to her as if she could hear, thanking her for the years they shared and the love that sustained him through her loss. He told her about Olivia, about the unexpected second chance at happiness. He promised to always honor Grace's memory while building a new future. Then he did something he had not been able to do before. He took the portrait down from its prominent place in the hallway and moved it to his study, where it could remain, cherished but no longer dominate his living space. It felt like the right balance between remembering and releasing. 3 months later, Olivia's gallery opened to a crowd of supporters and art enthusiasts. Cameron stood in the back, watching, her glow with pride as she introduced featured artists and explained their work. She had transformed the empty space into something magical, a haven where creativity flourished and dreams found validation. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Olivia found Cameron near a painting she had created specifically for the opening. It depicted 2 figures standing together against a stormy sky, separate but connected, strong because they chose to face the tempest side by side rather than alone. She slipped her hand into his, and Cameron pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights glitter through the gallery windows. This was not the ending Cameron had imagined for his story, but perhaps it was something better. A new chapter, written with hope and courage, and the willingness to trust that the heart, however wounded, could heal and love again. He whispered against her hair that he loved her. The words came easily now, no longer frightening. Olivia turned in his arms and smiled, that beautiful expression that still made his breath catch. She told him she loved him too, had probably loved him since that first stormy night when he opened his door to a desperate stranger. They kissed there, surrounded by art and possibility, 2 souls who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light together. The future remained uncertain, as futures always were. But they would face it hand in hand, proving that sometimes the heart's greatest strength was its ability to break open and bloom again. The end.